Thank you all for joining. I've got a lot to share today because I'm just back from a 2-week-long trip in the US. First to API Days in New York, and then to DrupalCon in Portland. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do both presentations. Like the Portland one, the DrupalCon one is quite Drupal specific, so I've tuned the Drupal part a little bit down, so it's more generic about the vision of this AI readiness and how you can prepare your organization for future AI adoption scenarios. And then after that, I'll chain it with the one that I did at API Days in New York, which was about this idea, like what we were talking about, the solution portal idea, and how developer portals could evolve beyond being purely about APIs, how to get over our API purism. I think that's the politically correct way of saying it. I had another thing in mind. Okay, so AI readiness. I did this presentation kind of like to share some of the things we've learned the last couple of months or couple of years, working on developer portals and thinking about where all of this is heading. And the presentation I did focused on these four topics. So the first one was how can we enable bots to do things? And second was how to enable bots to do all the things. Third was how to enable bots to make the world accessible, because there was an accessibility streak, and it was about multimodality, and I'll explain in a moment. And then last, I think that one I'll probably go over a bit faster, was about specifically what can the role of Drupal, the open source content management system, on top of which we build our product and our customers' developer portals, how that could play a role in this open interface web that's coming. I'll skip that one. If you're interested in that part, if you're in the Drupal community or you want to learn more about Drupal, always happy to have a chat about it. Or there'll be a recording from my presentation in Portland where I'll talk about that aspect. But I'll keep that one. I'll skip that one at the end, so that we can then move over to the other presentation. First, enabling bots to do things. So every presentation you've seen that talks about AI the last couple of months always start with, oh, this big change that happened when ChatGPT launched, and we all started worrying and all of that stuff. I'm sure that all of you have been thinking about, okay, so what is this doing for my job? How does this change things for my company? One of the core things that we were thinking about, at least from a developer portal's perspective, also, because the developer portal is also a website, but also from the wider open web community, was, will websites become obsolete? And then also connected to that, do you still need a CMS for building websites? Now, I've thought a lot about this, and I think that they will not become obsolete. This is very similar to how when open banking launched, people were talking about, so like, when mobile banking launched, that people were worried, like, okay, well, we still need internet banking, we'll still need regular banking. I think that these different interface paradigms live next to each other, and that because there's a new interface paradigm like a chat interface, and especially now with the news yesterday about ChatGPT with the new, I don't know if you've seen the demo already, but their new demo is really, really cool. And there are some on the grapevine, you might have heard some whispers that Apple is going to be using ChatGPT in their products going forward. That's not an official announcement yet, but there's been some rumors about that. So you could start wondering, like, are we moving into a world where our primary or our sole interface will be this chat-like interface? And that's for sure not going to happen, I think. So obviously, it's nice if you can talk to your computer and it answers back. That will for sure replace a bunch of interaction patterns. But if we're looking, there's actually a part in the world where a chat-like interface has replaced websites for a lot of functions. Actually, WeChat in China, and to some extent Line in broader Asia. And I'm not an expert in these things, so I hope I'm not making any obvious mistakes. But I've heard this. Actually, this was Holger from BMW who mentioned this to me. That when he was living in China, and I think it's WeChat, basically had replaced web interfaces for a bunch of different jobs. So like if you want to ask support, there will be, you'll be using WeChat. If you want to order something, you could do that through the same interface. So this world, there is already a part of the world where a conversational interface has replaced a bunch of capabilities that today in the Western world we are relying on websites for primarily. So, and here's the point: even though that they have these interfaces, they are still using websites also. Websites play a different role. They have a more experiential role that is like it's something that is living parallel to these chat-like interfaces. So it won't, not all of this will be replaced. There's reasons for having multimodal interfaces. But at the same time, some of the value can be shifted to another place. So what do we do about that? Now, first, also really, really important is that AI is not a singular thing. There's a bunch of different potential transformations that will all have different effects. There's a couple of, like, we typically jump ahead and we start thinking about general AI that's going to become like another human that can do stuff for you. Be that as like a, the AI overlords, that's the singularity maybe for some of you, or potentially like an agent that can do stuff for you. These are two scenarios. We're not really sure how far or how close they are, but there's a bunch of much closer scenarios, like, for example, AI embedded in existing software, and basically AI embedded in X. This is already happening. It's been happening for quite a while. Machine learning has been part of our software stack for a long time. So there's several scenarios there that have already transformed the world. Second type of scenario is this centralized AI for everything. Yeah, there's not too much to do with that. I don't think that we're very close to that yet. So I think that's less important to focus on. I think the third one is the really big scenario, is generative AI as a client or a server-side decentralized wrapper. What do I mean with that? I think that we're pretty close to like generative AI-like interfaces that do stuff for us. And that could either happen on the server side or on the client side. Client side is not really sure yet, because it takes a lot of computation. And right now, I asked this from at a CIO conference I attended. Like, do you think we're going to have LLMs in our pockets, like, on our smartphones? And it's like, well, you don't want to have one of these chips that are doing this inference models, that are running these inference models in your pocket, because they get really, really hot and they eat up a lot of energy. So probably this is going to stay in a server farm, at least for a little while. Maybe like a lightweight model might work in your phone. So probably it's going to be more server side. What I personally am really excited about is, can we have this in a decentralized way rather than in a centralized way where there's a single provider that is providing these things? But all of these scenarios are out there. We are not really sure which of them is really going to win, and how fast and when. And we can play with AI. We can do experiments trying to utilize it. We had AI the Docs the AI the Docs conference, where we had several people talking about how they're already using AI with API documentation in developer portals or in that intersection. I think, but there's a couple of things that we can do to prepare for this scenario and to make it feasible to use the things that our company has, or the capabilities of our organizations in these kind of interfaces. And that's so if you want to use AI as a wrapper, so if you want to use an LLM as a wrapper, which is kind of like a conceptual bridge that helps people to speak in their own language, in their own worlds, and then get answers from your world, kind of like crossing this semantic divide, then there's a couple of simple things that you can do. So I think that this model where we're just humans, or maybe even bots, are just talking to an LLM, and the LLM is the main thing that is answering questions, is going to have very limited applications. I think the real interesting thing is when you use an LLM to surface docs and to then generate answers based on that, and to surface APIs and to generate interactions based on that. I think these are the two really, really interesting stories. And we heard this on AI the Docs. Most of the use cases of people actually doing things with LLMs was about retrieval augmented generation, called RAG. From as far as how I understand it, you have a vector database that you're using to search for content, and then you use that content as context to generate an answer. And that this is like the way that people have found that generates the least hallucinations, and it gets you better results than if you just do straight LLM generation. Now the interesting thing is that when you want to do this, you need two things. You need, or at least two things. You need APIs for your organization to be able to do these actions that the LLM could trigger throughout your organization, and you need good documentation. And the old, as Kristof Weber, our colleague, has said on all his presentations recently, garbage in, garbage out. If you feed bad documentation to your LLM, either for training it or for the search, then you're going to get bad results. So having good documentation and having good APIs is one of the most important things companies can do to prepare for whatever AI scenario that's coming at us. And this was like one of the core messages that we've been talking about, and that I've been also mentioning on AI the Docs. So this is as a core tenet. Like, if you want to be ready for AI, documentation and APIs are essential. That's what we do with developer portals. So actually, I think there's a really important role for us as an industry in this future world, because we're the gatekeepers to the capabilities of our organization. We're the enabling constraints that at the same time protect our organizations and enable ecosystems, both internal and external, to do interesting things with the capabilities that our organizations have. Slight plug for the API Days conference. At the API Days conference, Mark O'Neill from Gartner mentions Drupal, which is the software that we're using for building developer portals, and Pronovix. So our company, as an implementation partner for Drupal developer portals, as one of the parties to work with if you're building a developer portal. So this to round this story off, we already start seeing people doing experiments with LLM-powered API agents. This was NVIDIA on their developer blog. They were talking about this, but there's been several people doing interesting demos and POCs with this kind of stuff, where you're consuming documentation to help an LLM do stuff in the real world. Very, very interesting. Now, let's talk about how to enable bots to do all the things. So if you're looking at APIs, application program interfaces, well, here I needed to explain a little bit more in the Drupal world, because in the Drupal world we experience APIs differently than in the API and the documentarian world. You already know this. The APIs are what drives applications on our smartphones. They're what are transforming how businesses operate, accelerating integrations, making it possible to connect business operations across organizations, connecting supply chains. All of these things that we all know about are happening over APIs. If you take a little step backwards, though, what we're basically doing is we're transforming the world with digital interfaces. I don't have a slide about it, but actually what we're doing is we're creating the infrastructure for magic. And I say that maybe a little bit flippantly, but actually, if you think about it, this is pretty much what we're doing. Like, we're making it possible to see at a distance, to hear at a distance, to act at a distance, all by doing some gestures. Well, right now it's still using a smartphone as an interface, but soon maybe you're just doing some complicated gestures and suddenly magic happens. Things happen around us. This is really, really exciting time that we're living in. Now, how do we get right? Like, thinking about this, how do organizations operate in this? Because well, how do you at the same time enable this and protect yourself as an organization? And to think about that, I like I made this diagram, and this is based on biological worlds, how things work in biological world. Organizations have a boundary. Today, that boundary is somewhat open, but at the same time, there is a boundary where there's a certain information context in which people that work at an organization are sharing information, and then there's a boundary where some information still permeates to the outside, be that through people or through some of the interfaces of the organization. So you could imagine a world where most of the information that travels beyond the boundary of an organization is happening through APIs. It's hard with people. People will always be creating somewhat leaky interfaces, but leaky boundaries. But that's also how nature works. Like cell membranes have some permeability still. And then on top of these APIs, we're building these different types of interfaces that can either provide a consumer-facing interface through smartphones or documents or web interfaces or something like that, or connectors to other organizations. The recording will be available for people that joined. I'll come back to this graphic, but I wanted to shape that picture first. Now, if you think about what API stands for, API stands for Application Programming Interface. And this interface word is a tricky one because it carries a lot of meaning, and it's a super important word for us in the software world, and we have like a pretty good grasp of what it means. But I want to kind of like iterate on that and double click on it, because the generally understood way of interpreting interfaces is the place where two systems interact or communicate with each other. It's a very passive thing in how it's generally understood. It's the place where two systems connect with each other and interact with each other. But actually, if you think about it, what we're doing is that we're changing this interfaces from a very passive kind of incidental thing into a very active and deliberate thing. And this is a definition I came up with. I believe that digital interfaces are not the result of interactions, but they are the agreements that make interactions easier. They're the enablers of interactions at a much larger scale and of a different nature. And this really changes everything. because we've had interfaces for forever. We've got lots and lots of interfaces. Organizations always had interfaces. Salespeople are interfaces. They're an interface that go out into the world to try to build a new relationship with another organization that is going to be connected to them. Telephone numbers are interfaces. They help you to find out, how you can reach somebody. A telephone book is an interface for interfaces. When you look at all of these, and there's several other examples, like a contact us page, there's APIs, there's applications like smartphone applications. All of these are different interface patterns that have their own little quirkiness. They all have their own cultural ways of thinking about how you get access to them and how to use them. And I called this, or I coined interface folklore for this to describe it. It's basically a whole bunch of organically grown interface conventions that help us to navigate how to do stuff in the real world using these digital interfaces. Now, one of the predictions I made was that the lack of explicit like a lack of a list of explicitly declared interfaces is going to become a problem in a world where AI start doing stuff instead of us, because it's not too hard to imagine an AI that starts using or abusing certain interfaces for other purposes than what they're originally meant for. Actually, if you think about it, this is already happening today. If you're on LinkedIn, I'm sure you're getting unsolicited job offers, people that are trying to sell stuff to you, people with a different agenda that are trying to do things. Right now, there's probably already some AIs doing this instead of people. Actually, I'm sure this is already happening. And is this really how people want LinkedIn to be used? You start seeing people making a declaration saying, like, please don't reach out to me with job offers. I'm happy, I'm fine, or don't try to connect with me unless you've actually met me. There's some of these contracts that are being declared on top of the existing interface contracts, the public non-explicit contracts that we have that are being declared to help people navigate this world. So I think that what we're going to have to do in a world where AI makes these interactions much, much cheaper and easier, we'll have to become much more deliberate about what interfaces we are exposing and what kind of contracts that we're providing over those interfaces. Is your company on social media? Are you still on X, or have you abandoned your account on Twitter? What kind of response times can people expect? Things like this, I think we'll have to start declaring, and also having all these interfaces declared will make it possible for bots to do a lot more interesting things. Now, this is something that we from the API world, we can bring to the world out there, because this is basically what we've been doing with developer portals, making API application programming interfaces discoverable and findable on the open web, so people can find out, like, what kind of interfaces do we provide as an organization, and under what conditions are we making those available, and how can I get access to one of these interfaces. And then maybe in a near future, we'll also include the human interfaces that we have as an organization as part of this interface landscape that we're declaring to the world. And this is one of those forecasts. I'm not sure it will happen. I'm not a prophet. I like forecasting, but that means that there's always a level of uncertainty in any of these forecasts. But it's maybe something to start thinking about for your organization. I've made this other forecast that a CIO, maybe in the near future, might become chief interface officer instead of chief information officer, because of interfaces being such an important element as enabling constraints that help us to steer how people can interact with our organizations and us as individuals. And then you could imagine that bots can do all the things, that they're able to do any kind of interaction that we are trying to do. And I'll go a little bit faster over this. Drupal is an open source content management system that is very, I think, very much ahead of the game in terms of accessibility. They've done an enormous, like the community has done an enormous, tremendous amount of work, not only trying to make the websites that we provide to the world accessible, but also to make the interfaces through which people interact with the content management system available for people that have certain limitations in how they can interact with software. And I believe that there's a really interesting extra applicability of all these interfaces in how they can make their world more accessible. I'll go a bit faster over this. So interfaces play this double role in a world. They help to create experiences, like a beautiful website, but also are tools that give us power over the world around us, like that help us to do things in the world. And while it's hard to provide an equivalent experience to everybody, because like if you have red-green color blindness, this is a very different picture than if you don't. But these interfaces that help us to do things in the world, those are things that really we should provide equal access to. And there's some regulation coming out in the European Union about accessibility for websites. Next year, websites need to be accessible. It's going to be tricky because very few companies want us to really invest money into this, and especially for developer portals that are like a smaller aspect of the story, of the whole web presence. But what I would argue is that rather than trying to create the same kind of experience for everybody, I think we should make the actions that you can do through our web presences to make those explicit so that it becomes easier to find those. And then we're actually going to make everybody's life better, and not only people that need help in accessibility. Because APIs have this interesting nature that make it possible to translate them into multimodal interaction systems. What I mean with that is, this was, I think, Laura who mentioned this. If you have an API, you can turn it into a touch interface, you can turn it into a voice interface, you can turn it into text interface. It's a programmable interface that you can turn into different things as depending on how you need it. And then you could imagine universal accessibility, where anything that can be done with your organization, be it creating a subscription, canceling a subscription, ordering pizza, whatever it is, that it becomes something that becomes not only accessible for humans, whatever different accessibility profiles they have, but also accessible for AI that are helping humans, which is going to even improve the accessibility of things. And I'll hold this one here. This is the story that I told. Is about discoverability and findability, kind of like a parallel of what we're doing in the API world and what that could do in the wider world. Might still be useful. Now, the thing that is more straightforwardly about APIs, and then some of you have been in I've seen some names that I recognize. Some of you have been in my talk at API Days in New York. So this is going to be a rehash of that one. Probably the words are going to be slightly different, but it's going to be the similar story. This was the talk that I gave in New York, which was about how to build developer portals that help us to forego commoditization of our APIs. But the underlying idea was, there was a really interesting underlying idea that came out of that, which was the idea of like not to look at developer portals as API purist. So not to just see developer portals as the place where you go to check out your API documentation, but to see developer portals as and there was Laura Vash who unearthed this, to see them as not as developer portals, but as development portals, or as solution portals, and meaning to turn, like to have a web interface, a website, where people can come to find out how they can do certain things with your organization. So rather than purely focusing on, well, here's our APIs and this is how you use them, to say, okay, what is it that you're trying to do? Let me figure out how we can help you with that, and to make it more concrete. There are some issues with that. Yesterday, I had an API resilience podcast episode that I recorded with Daria Luchenko, who's also here. Hello. So, and a really interesting thing came out in our conversation was that people might be looking for API documentation, and then it's really hard to kind of like divert them to something else. And then there's a UX problem that we need to solve there. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit through this presentation, and then I'll deep dive on that aspect. So, harnessing developer portals to defend against commoditization. I'll skip over this part. That was the booth, and that was the developer success podcast. So we're on two. One is API resilience, one is developer success podcast. If you want to hear more stories, like, or where all these ideas come from, then, or a lot of them come from the podcast interviews, go and check them out. This story, I started a little bit of a rebellion, maybe. I'm not sure if it's a rebellion. Like, in the beginning of the year, I made a blog post titled "APIs are utilities, not products," and quite a few people had some interesting opinions on that. Not everybody was as excited about that story, or it caused quite strong emotional reactions. It was really interesting, I won't go too deeply on it, but one of the core ideas was that, or the way to understand that story is that we've been looking at APIs kind of like Lego bricks, where they're like tools that you can use to build and rebuild and break down and start to build something new. It's kind of like a tool for developers to play around with. Where actually how our organizations would like us to use APIs is more as building bricks. So Lego bricks clearly are a product. They're actually very differentiated products with clear brands, and there's a, well, that's too much story, but it's a very different thing from a building brick, which is more of a commodity. And I would argue that APIs are quite a bit more like this commodity, because they're helping us to build the interactions, or the interfaces through which people will have the actual interactions. Because actually APIs are intermediate goods. They're being used by developers to build the end experience that people are going to have. And there's a it doesn't flow as well as it happened in New York. So yeah, let me see. Do I fast forward or do I dig further on this? I'm going to go out of the presentation mode. Let me see. Yeah, I think I'm going to skip over this part. I think because the commoditization, that's really a different topic. I think the part that I do want to talk about that's more important, and then it gives us more time for questions. So I'll skip over this part about how to differentiate your developer portal and all of that. Probably there's something we can do in another webinar to dive deeper in on that. Instead, I'll talk about this part here. Um, uh, about solution portals, because I think this was the promise that we made to all of you. That we would do a deep dive on that and some ideas about how to turn your developer portal into a solution portal. And that's also connected to how to escape commoditization, but I'll skip over that part of the content. So for 3-4 years now, we've been talking about interface portals. And this is how it connects to the previous story. Interface portals as like a portal where you can go to find out what are all the interfaces that are accessible to you provided by a certain organization and how you can get access to them. People didn't get it. Like interface portals was so abstract. Like the story I told you just before, it was very abstract. And it just didn't really connect to people. But still, there is this problem that I think we have as an industry, in that we have this tool, like tool, I'm going to use the words because I'm looking for the other word, tool fetishism, where we're completely stuck with just thinking about our industry from this tool perspective, where we are, we see what we're doing, like we're basically, we're building a tool, like we're building documentation specifically for developers. And while that is an important thing, and when API developers were like recently, there were like kind of like the darlings of the industry. Still, they're really important. Although there's been some changes in the industry recently with all the layoffs, and some of that power structure has been shifting. But actually, I think that it would make more sense for companies to look at these APIs and this developer experience and all these things that we're doing from the perspective of what is the fastest way to get the job done that this person has to do. So rather than to just focus on, okay, how can we make the best possible API experience and developer experience and make it really, really easy and fun to build stuff, kind of like, the Lego thing, to how can we help people to the quickest possible build robust, scalable, structurally sound, future-proof things that are going to help their companies to do things. And what we have seen, or what we started seeing, so when you start looking at the world from this perspective, you start seeing something really interesting. In that, and I'll show a couple of examples of developer portals that are going beyond API documentation to start calling out non-API solutions that are embedded in their developer portals, which is, I think, the first step towards the solution portal that I was mentioning earlier. So first one is the Stripe documentation. And as you can see on the Stripe documentation, this text here that I highlighted is you can use pre-built checkout pages to accept online payments. This is basically what I would call like another interface. Well, it's like a widget, or yes, something that you can, a low no-code solution that you can use to build a digital experience for your organization. So instead of building the full API integration, you could just use this pre-built checkout page. Similar story with the Terminals API on Adyen. If you're looking at the Terminals API, the people that are looking at this page, they're probably trying to build some sort of terminal solution for their company. But if that's a small enough company, maybe it would be more useful for them to just buy a terminal instead of building this from scratch. And then what Adyen has done is that they've made this call out pointing to their terminal products that you can just buy instead of building your own. Similar on Twilio Docs, you see that they've got this products and solutions listing now, where it's not just here's all our APIs and this is our catalog and good luck. But it's like, okay, here's different products and solutions that we've built that you might want to use to do the thing that you're trying to do. So, and I think this comes down to this idea that if we're trying to create the maximum utility of the work that we're doing with APIs, with our developer portals, I believe that we should not be API purists, that we should be looking at how do we facilitate and reduce the friction of this journey that people are on to create a solution for their organization. How do we make that as fast as possible and as simple as possible? And there's two patterns here, and then probably there's more. One pattern, and this is what we coined together with Daria on the podcast yesterday, is solution embed. That's you can have your API documentation and you can like embed solutions, other solutions from an organization into your documentation, which I think is really cool. And the other pattern is like really a solution portal where I'm not sure if Twilio is necessarily a good architecture yet, but like where it's a portal or a developer portal that is structured around solution journeys rather than around API journeys. And solution journeys are probably multimodal. So probably you have different types of interfaces that are maybe even using the same API, but like already packaged in a widget or something like that, and then exposing them together on the portal so that people can like choose the one that is right for them. Those are like the two patterns that we currently are seeing. I was talking with Laura this morning about the Dev Portal Awards and the categories that we'll have. And they're not final yet, but we're nearing finalization. But we're talking about like having categories around this so that we can discover what people are doing for creating this solution embedding or solution portals out there in the real world. We're also doing research into insurance and banking portals and how they are embedding solutions already today, and if they're what we can find out there, or how they're building solution portals as like an architectural perspective. And then we'll be publishing this research. We'll also have a webinar about this a little bit later. We have one customer that we've built something like this, although that I think that the architecture still could be better, and we're working on this. But KBC Bank in Belgium, they have a business solutions catalog where instead of having just their APIs or like different solutions, they have like a problem area, like a job to be done, that they're putting in the catalog. And then they have different solutions in the documentation of that problem area, like QR codes or widgets, or a partner portal, or like a partner relationship, or the API, depending on what is right for you and what you're trying to do, that you could look at integrating with and building into your experiences for your customers. So I think this creates this idea or this possibility of an interface portfolio where we can, and I don't know if this is fully in our purview as the API documentation or the developer portal crowds, but there's a potential here to create, to move outside of that purely technical box and to own this part of the interface landscape that our organization has, that helps to create that helps to create automation, or maybe even that helps to have interactions with our organizations, so we can help our organizations to at the same time protect the organization against too much interactions, like because of automated AI, and also to enable positive interactions with the ecosystems around us and our customers and our partners. And then really important point, and that I can't stress enough, is that 90% of the business world are SMEs. And SMEs typically don't have budgets to build custom integrations. They might want to use an API, but maybe wrap it into something else, something that makes it easier to use an API. And I think there's two ways to look at this. You could look at it from okay, we have our developer channel, and then we have our low no code channel, and then we have our, I don't know, what other channel. But I'm not sure if that is the most effective way, because maybe an SME might still want to do an integration if it's like a franchise with multiple small companies. And then once they see that the existing low no code solutions are not sufficient, they do need to make an investment. Maybe they need to see that gradation so that they can choose the right adventure for their organization and for their integration journey. Yeah, and then think about, as a further advice, think about adapting your interface portfolio to your developer audience. Like you might need different types of interfaces depending on the audience that you're trying to serve. And then, yeah, so, and I think I'm going to wrap up here.